Financial problems and the daily overload of responsibilities reach such proportions that Joy Lynn feels extremely depressed and resigned. Her friend Maureen wants to help her somehow and comes up with a surprise. One day she books a babysitter for the evening and unannounced visits Joy Lynn, persuading her to go to a bar together. The young mother is at first reluctant, but is eventually persuaded. Maureen calls for a sitter, and immediately after her appearance, the friends leave the house. The bar is completely ordinary. The friends just sit at a table and have drinks. However, Joy Lynn feels at ease for the first time in a long time and forgets about her daily troubles. There is also a group of their mutual friends at the premises. At one point, Maureen notices that there is a very handsome man sitting with them who keeps glancing in Joy Lynn's direction. Maureen tells her friend about this. Joy says that she also likes the man. Joy Lynn even thinks about approaching him, but suddenly the man himself walks up to their table and starts a conversation. The new acquaintance's name is Howard. He is very friendly, and the conversation flows freely. The man buys drinks for both friends and dances with each of them, but it is clear that he is singling out Joy Lynn and trying to date her. Noticing this, Joy Lynn openly tells him that she has 2 preschool-age sons whom she is raising herself. Howard also tells about himself. He is 39 years old, also divorced. He has 3 children, but they live with their mother as he works as an IT technician. And the nature of his position is such that he often has to travel almost all over the country. Howard offers to arrange some sort of trip for Joy Lynn and her sons in the coming days. He keeps his word, and after a few days the trip actually takes place. The new acquaintance organizes this small joint outing, taking into account the needs of the children, and immediately establishes an excellent contact with the boys. Being freshly divorced, Joy Lynn does not even want to think about any serious relationship, but she admits to herself that she is charmed by this man. She decides to approach the matter in such a way that it will be an acquaintance without mutual obligations, and then she will see. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, the same city where Joy Lynn lives, is the University of New Mexico, considered one of the best in the state, by the way. The university has a huge campus, split into different parts and covering a total area of several square miles. It is on this campus that a series of crimes are taking place that have been keeping Albuquerque investigators up at night for several years. An unknown perpetrator is assaulting and raping female students living there. The assaults have a characteristic pattern. A woman lies down to sleep in her own bed, wakes up suddenly in the middle of the night, and sees a masked man standing over her. The victim does not even have the opportunity to react, as the perpetrator puts a handkerchief to her nose, which is soaked in some chemical substance, probably ether. The woman loses consciousness, after which she is brutally raped. When she later regains consciousness, the perpetrator is gone. Police assume that the rapist first observes the targeted victim, checking whether she lives alone or with someone. He probably peeps at her through the window, standing by the building. Sometimes he enters through the window, and if it is closed, he uses a glass cutter. As for the traces, the perpetrator left no fingerprints anywhere. However, police have his DNA. This makes it clear that the same man assaults not only female students, but also young women living near the campus. His DNA was secured at the site of 5 assaults, but it is believed that there were at least 11, while the first rape took place in 1991. Since the rapes take place on or near campus, investigators are considering that the perpetrator may be a lecturer or administrative employee of the university or a former student. As of recently, police also have a portrait of the rapist. It was created after a woman who was assaulted in 2000 managed to scare off her attacker, and when he fled, she managed to see his face. Soon after the incident, the memory portrait was published in the local media. That's when the Albuquerque police decided to take the unusual step of prosecuting the DNA itself. Formally, this was equivalent to charging an admittedly unidentified person, but with specific DNA, with rape, the idea being to prevent the statute of limitations on the rapist's actions, since the formal initiation of a prosecution can make the elapsed time not count towards any statute of limitations. The acquaintance with Howard develops further, and Joy Lynn, who, as a matter of principle, would not want to rush into anything or get emotionally involved, can no longer even hide from herself that she is increasingly attracted to this recently met man. Howard showered both her and her children with gifts. He is very generous in general, and several times he has paid some bills for Joy Lynn without telling her anything about it. He tries to visit his beloved as often as possible, and it is clear that these visits, despite the presence of two absorbing young children, give him pleasure. Joy Lynn also appreciates Howard's openness. At the very beginning of their acquaintance, he informed her that he would soon have to move to Pueblo, in Colorado, about 500 kilometers away from Albuquerque by car, because he wants to live close to his children. According to Joy Lynn, Howard has put the matter honestly and is a responsible father. She feels that she has met Prince Charming. So, in early 2002, her beloved moves to Pueblo. However, the acquaintance continues and Howard visits Joy Lynn every other weekend, sometimes even weekly. He loves to give her surprises. It happens that he suddenly shows up with equipment bought especially for her and takes her on some trip, organizing and paying for a babysitter. However, he also spends a lot of time with the boys, who love his company. The couple finally decides on a long-distance relationship. This is actually a sealing of the existing state of affairs. Just a few months later, Howard surprises his beloved again. He falls to his knees in front of her and proposes to her, emphasizing in his short but extremely romantic speech that before he met her, he was absolutely convinced that he would never decide to marry again in his life. Joy Lynn hesitates strongly. A long-distance relationship is quite different from a long-distance marriage. The latter is ruled out by the woman in general, which in effect means that after marriage, she and her children would have to move to another state. Howard is still willing to wait. He also promises that if Joy Lynn accepts his proposal, he will pay for her teacher's studies. After all, he knows that she has always dreamed of working as a teacher, but this has been an unattainable goal for her. A few more months pass, and Joy Lynn finally agrees. The wedding is scheduled for September 2003. About 800 kilometers from Albuquerque, in the state of Oklahoma, there is the city of Norman. It is the home of the well-known University of Oklahoma in the U.S. In June 2003, an event takes place in the university's student town that electrifies its residents. A female student sleeping in her own bed wakes up in the middle of the night and is horrified to find her hands tied and a collar around her neck, while an unknown man stands over her. The young woman, in a panic, rushes out of her seat and runs to the bathroom. There, despite her tied hands, she manages to lock the door from the inside. The perpetrator tries to get into the room, but without success. Shocked with horror, the student begins to scream. She hears someone running down the stairs. When it becomes completely quiet, the young woman comes out of the bathroom and calls the police. As it turns out, the perpetrator did not leave fingerprints, but investigators managed to secure his DNA. Unfortunately, it is not in the database, so the trace cannot be matched to anyone. September 2003. Howard and Joy Lynn get married in Hawaii. Everything is organized and paid for by Howard, doing it, as he points out, for his beloved, since she once mentioned that a wedding in Hawaii was her big dream. It's a ceremony like a fairy tale. It takes place outdoors, in a beautiful setting, and behind the bride and groom's backs, you can see a waterfall in the background. The faces of both of them are beaming with happiness. After the wedding, Joy Lynn does not immediately move to Pueblo, as she has agreed with Howard that her children will still finish this school year at their old school. Her husband is a bit jealous and calls his newly married spouse very often, checking on where she is and what she is doing. Joy Lynn finds this very amusing. More crimes are taking place in Norman, and their scenario exactly matches what happened in 2003. There is one difference. Now, some assaults end in rape. By 2004, a total of 6 assaults are taking place in the University of Oklahoma college town, which police attribute to the same perpetrator. A profiler asked for help after analysis concludes that the rapist is most likely a middle-aged white man who otherwise leads a normal life and has a good job. American police work independently in each state, so investigators have no idea that the same perpetrator is also spreading terror in a neighboring state. It's not until November 2004, more than a year after their marriage, that Joy Lynn moves to Howard in Pueblo. Everything is going perfectly. Her husband, as usual, still has to make business trips, but naturally now the two can see each other during the week as well. Howard is just as he was before, affectionate, caring, attentive to her and the children, and from every trip he brings gifts for all three of them. The only thing Joy Lynn doesn't like is the way her husband sometimes talks about other women, commenting on their clothing. He calls every girl in shorts or tight jeans a slut, and with a fierce expression on his face, expresses the opinion that a woman dressed like that probably goes to bed with whomever she falls into bed with. One day, Joy Lynn wants to check something in their joint insurance. She looks for it in Howard's documents and comes across a sheet there with the names and addresses of 9 women. She looks at the data and suddenly the blood almost hits her head. All the addresses are in cities her husband has traveled to recently. Could it be that during his business trips, Howard regularly cheats on her? There is an asterisk next to one of the names. Joy Lynn gives herself a few moments to calm down, then calls the number. A young woman answers, but nothing at all comes out of the brief conversation with her. Joy Lynn hangs up and calls her husband. She talks about the note she found and asks him directly what it's about. Howard assures her that these women are old acquaintances. The list itself was created many years ago, and the coincidence of city names is simply due to the fact that he has, after all, been traveling to the same places on business for years. Her husband assures her of his love, and that under no circumstances would he put their happiness together on the line. About a month later, Joy Lynn is looking for a mini cassette inserted into the camera, on which her older son's school performance was recorded. There are plenty of tapes among Howard's photographic paraphernalia, but they are not signed, so the woman starts playing each one. Suddenly, she sees herself on the TV screen, lying in bed, apparently unconscious, and Howard having sex with her. The scene takes place in their own bedroom, but Joy Lynn is certain that she does not remember a similar situation. Joy Lynn is completely confused on the one hand and furious with her husband on the other. When he returns home, she screams at him. Howard says that once, when they both drank a little too much and she fell asleep, he decided to make such a film. He asks his wife for forgiveness and promises that such a situation will never happen again. Joy Lynn doesn't remember ever having drunk so much, but decides to accept the apology and not return to the subject again. However, the spouses argue more and more often. When Joy Lynn goes on vacation with her children to her parents in Albuquerque a few months later, she decides to stay there and not return to Pueblo again. She does not admit to her parents or friends that things are going badly in her marriage. Looking from the sidelines, by the way, it would be hard to notice. Her husband visits her regularly, buys her flowers, brings her gifts, organizes outings with her and her sons, so it's a bit like before, when they were together before their marriage. Howard keeps trying to persuade his wife to return, but Joy Lynn consistently refuses. It's October 2009, when Joy Lynn accidentally comes across an article in the newspaper about the so-called ether rapist. In the newspaper is a memory portrait of the perpetrator and a calendar of assaults. 12 of them took place in Albuquerque, others in Austin, Texas. Although the memory portrait doesn't tell her anything, but all of a sudden the woman turns her attention to the listing with the dates and locations of the assaults and realizes that they coincide exactly with the places where her husband was at the time mentioned. In her mind, like a flash, there is also a memory of a mysterious piece of paper and a video recorded by Howard in which she saw herself unconscious. Joy Lynn feels faint. She doesn't know what to think. At times, she is overwhelmed with certainty that the ether rapist is Howard. At times, this supposition seems absurd to her. Either way, she is considering whether to report these suspicions to the police. The police show up at Joy Lynn's house before she has time to make a decision for herself. The detective informs her that Howard is accused of trying to murder a police officer. As it turns out, the police had been investigating her husband for some time, as he had been caught watching some woman. During the course of this investigation, Howard constructed a homemade bomb and attempted to blow up the home of the policeman who was handling his case. The idea was probably to prevent the police from taking a DNA sample, because Joy Lynn's husband knew that he would then immediately be exposed as an ether rapist. In the end, the murder attempt failed, and Howard was captured near the police officer's home shortly after he planted the bomb. The criminal's DNA was sent to several places, including Albuquerque, and it soon came to light. Howard Bruce is a criminal who has been wanted for years. Joy Lynn is completely heartbroken. She immediately decides that she will tell everything to her children, so that they will learn the truth about their stepfather from her, and not from the television. Soon she also files for divorce. November 2009. Howard Bruce, in documents, Robert Howard Bruce, is charged with 44 counts of sexual assault. He eventually pleads guilty to 40 sex crimes committed in 4 states: New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Texas. During his trial, he talks about how he used to peep at women through a window in the early 1980s when he was studying in Norman. Soon this was no longer enough for him, and he began sneaking into apartments and houses. He would enter the room where his victim was sleeping, put her to sleep with a cloth soaked in ether or another chemical, and then carry out the rape. At first he wore a mask. Then he started using chemicals to put his victims to sleep. He mostly used ether, and if he couldn't get it, he bought other substances. The fact that he traveled almost all the time for his work gave him freedom to hunt women. During the trial, a letter that the defendant wrote to one of his victims was read out. It contains an apology and a request for forgiveness. Besides, it is interesting to see how the rapist views his own actions. I don't know if I did it for the adrenaline rush or for the sheer sense of power or control, and what actually drove me to do it. All I know is that I was addicted to it and couldn't stop. Remorse and guilt were always with me, but after time they weakened to the point where I would do it again. I struggled with it throughout my adult life. For sex crimes, Howard Bruce receives a total of 333 years in prison, while for the attempted murder of a police officer, he is sentenced to 64 years, so he will never be released. Ether Rapist is serving his sentence in one of the U.S. federal prisons. Thank you for listening until the end. Goodbye.